Hi, friends. Susan Blackwell from the Spark File here to let you know that the doors are open for the Spark File Illume, a 9-month group creativity coaching mastermind that invites you to be the Chief Creative Officer and Chief Marketing Officer of your creativity. But what does that mean? That means in 9 months in Illume, you will clarify and advance your big creative goals and learn how to effectively share your work with the world. Now, if you're listening to this and you're an experienced creative or an accomplished professional who seeks a space where it is safe to attempt something you've never tried before, or complete a big creative project, or take your work to the next level and acquire the skills needed to share your creative work with the world, Illume might be right for you. We are calling in emotionally intelligent, high-functioning creatives who are ready to level up. You can find out more by going to thesparkfile.com/Illume, but do it now to find out if Illume is right for you and to save with early bird discounts. That's thesparkfile.com/Illume. Take a leap, take a risk. Go to thesparkfile.com/Illume and join us for Illume.
The SparkFile podcast may contain profanity and other adult content.
Please use your discretion.
When I bump into something that inspires me, I dump it in my spark file. Could be something that I want to make or how I want to be. I pump it in my spark file. I jump into my spark file. Let's open up the spark file.
Welcome to the Spark File, your one-stop goodie bag for creative inspiration.
Hi, I'm Laura Camian.
And I'm Susan Blackwell. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome to you. If you're joining us for the 50th time, welcome to you. You may be asking yourself, what exactly is a Spark File? Where do I get one? What do I file in it? These are good questions, and we have got answers.
A Spark File is a place where you consistently collect all of your inspirations and fascinations.
So here's the deal. We are makers, and we make all kinds of things.
And if you are like us and making stuff all the time or want to be making stuff all the time, you know that the wellspring of inspiration can run a little dry.
But we got your back. We're on the lookout for fresh ideas, images, and inspiration that spark our creativity and pique our curiosity. Things that inspire us to get up off of our asses and make things like this podcast.
Or a pseudoscientific examination of the half-dead among us.
What the actual fuck? Or a novel written by many, but with a singular vision and voice.
Ooh, I like. Every episode, we're going to reach into our Spark files and exchange some sparks. And from time to time, we're going to talk to some folks who spark us too.
And if you're not careful, you just might get your narrative altered. So without further ado, let's open up
the Spark File.
Cams, you're on Puzzle Spark?
Yes.
I've had more sparks about that spark.
Oh, Blackwell.
I love that spark so much.
I have spark insecurity.
Hashtag spark regret. You have spark regret? Listen, I was like, I don't think I said it expressly, but I thought it, which is, I feel like doing those, when we were talking about living a good, long, healthy life.
That's right.
Doing puzzles contributes to that. And also I was thinking how much I want to do a puzzle with Nathan, because I think you have the best conversations.
It is the best, even lovely quietness together.
And quietness
so
together.
awesome.
But also, I was thinking a cool present for Nathan would be to take one of his beautiful photographs. He's incredibly well-traveled. He's done beautiful photography around the world. To take one of those photographs, if I can get my hands on the file, and have it made into a puzzle.
Yes.
I think that would be a really neat gift. And then we could put it together and maybe even display it.
Yeah. I think that would be incredible.
I think it would too.
I think it would be a gift that just keeps on giving.
Sparks.
That
spark was a gift that keeps on giving. And I don't want you to have, why do you have, no.
I just sometimes do. I doubt my sparks, but
I feel you.
I'm
I do too.
just in, in an effort
We
for
want to put out
true
the highest
honesty and
quality sparks for you people. So we have very, very high standards.
we do have high standards. But thank you. No, I'm just having a moment. But Susan, I'm going to talk about my spark, but I want to ask you something first.
Okay.
Have you and I ever talked about zombies? Like, has that ever?
Well, we talked about the zombies when we did Breaking Up with Technology. And I said, once you see the zombies, you can't unsee the zombies.
That's right. That might be the only time that zombies have come up, though, in our 20-year friendship. And I think it's time we talk a little further about them.
I'm happy to have this conversation. I am not in the zombie thrall, but I know that the rest of the world loves a zombie.
Well, it's interesting that you say that because I'm not particularly into zombies myself, like not just zombies for zombies' sake, but the book and the movie World War Z.
Yeah.
Did you see that?
Is it a good thing or a bad thing that I haven't?
It doesn't matter. We're going to talk about it anyway.
You'll have to
I'm going to have some spoilers.
bring me up
but
to
you've
speed.
had a good 6-7 years to see it. So I have no sympathy.
Hashtag 7-year spoiler. Yes.
But I think that the book and the movie made me think differently about zombies. And it kind of, I don't know, made me give them a second look because of the way they handled it.
You're giving zombies another shot?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I'd written them off a bit too soon, I think. Yeah. So World War Z is a book that was written by Max Brooks. He's the son of Mel Brooks.
Really?
Just FYI. Mm-hmm.
Did not know that.
And he wrote it in 2006. The rights were purchased immediately, and it was made into a movie starring Brad Pitt. And that movie came out in 2013. Fun fact, World War Z video game just came out this year. I'm not into it. I don't know anything about it, except it happened. It just happened. So it's still happening. And I guess people are still talking about whether World War Z will have a sequel movie. It apparently was a possibility, but I don't know what's happening with that either. But Max Brooks claimed his inspiration for the book and the way that he wrote it came from The Good War, an oral history of World War II.
Oh, Spark. What an unlikely spark-a-doodle.
And The Good War consists of a series of interviews with various men and women from across the globe who directly experienced the events leading up to, including, and following the Second World War.
And he made a zombie thing out of it.
Yes.
Isn't life interesting? Aren't sparks fascinating?
Are so freaking interesting. See, I think the reason why this movie made me think differently about zombies is that they treated it like it was a pandemic.
Yes.
And that it wasn't simply like the half dead inexplicably walking around.
Can I ask you a question to make sure that I'm thinking along the same lines that I'm picking up what you're putting down? Is World War Z the one in the trailer? I think I've only seen the trailer where the zombies don't sort of lumber slowly. They move very quickly.
They can do both.
They have two gears.
They can do both.
They have 2 gears.
And I think it has to do with whether or not they smell or sense
what they need.
The
thing that struck me that I thought was a really fun, good idea about that, just seeing it in the trailer, isn't there an image in the trailer where they're like piling on top of each other, almost forming like a human bridge to get to whatever it is that they want?
That's right.
Okay. The thing I thought was so interesting about that was it seemed like the behavior of an animal who is rabid, that an animal who normally is nocturnal, doesn't come out during the day, or is normally fearful of people will hard charge straight at a human because the virus inside of the rabies, I'll just say rabies, the rabies inside of them wants to spread itself. And so it will like a rabid raccoon will scramble at you and try to get that rabies into you.
You are more correct than you even know, because the World War Z, the way that they handled the zombieism is that it was a virus, and the virus infected people, and this zombie state is the result of the illness that virus infected people with.
I thought that idea was so good. Such a good idea.
To me, it's genius. Finally, I was like, oh, this makes total sense, and probably hits a little closer to the truth, but we'll get to that.
Zombies.
Yeah. So in World War Z, he had a similar framework in the book and in the movie as The Good War, this oral history of World War II. There's a character that's eventually played by Brad Pitt in the movie who's like a UN representative, and he's like piecing together the history of how this pandemic started, where it started, what is the timeline, who has figured out how to deal with the zombies. And because essentially when something like this happens, you have to get to the bottom of it. Like it's investigative journalism. Right. So in the book, the story also weaves in like comments on government ineptitude, corporate corruption, human short-sightedness, and a bit of like national isolationism, like what happens when nations close their borders and say,
yes.
But this was 2006, interestingly enough.
Yeah.
And it also examines like survivalism and sort of uncertainty. And I read this quote that where Max was talking about the mindlessness of zombies that terrified him. There's no logic, like there's no premeditated thought that goes into it. Unlike let's say, a mountain lion is tracking you, or there's a predator who, you might be able to apply certain types of logic, but with zombies, there's a mindlessness to it that sort of makes everyone susceptible. This is the quote from Max. The lack of rational thought has always scared me when it came to zombies. The idea that there is no middle ground, no room for negotiation, that's always terrified me. Of course, that applies to terrorists, but it can also apply to a hurricane or a flu pandemic or the potential earthquake that I grew up living with in LA. Any kind of mindless extremism scares me, and we're living in some pretty extreme times. Really, really interesting, especially, like I said, it was 10, 13 years ago now.
Yeah.
So one thing interesting, the movie does vary quite a bit from the book. And now that 13 years has gone by, a friend of mine, hi, Colin. Colin loaned me the book again recently, and I read it a long time ago, but I hadn't read it in a while. And this is his idea. I can't take credit, but he's like, they didn't really use a lot of the material in the book. They used some for the movie, but now that we have Netflix and we have so many
series,
he's like, World War Z needs to be a Netflix series. You could almost do these chapters because the chapters take place. It would remind me a little bit of Sense8. I don't know if you ever saw that, but these things happen all around the world, and these stories, they're happening simultaneously until this one person is like trying to piece together when and where certain things happen. So I would love it if someone would make this into a Netflix series.
So Netflix, we have a spark for you.
So we have a spark for you, Netflix. Or anywhere. It could be Amazon Prime. It could be anything.
Hulu.
But Hulu, you too. So you could also do something similar with, like, there's a lot of conversations brewing about a potential civil war in the U.S.
Oh, God. You
could do something similar, like right from the perspective that it's already happened and someone is trying to piece together the oral history of like what led up to it and how it happened and where are we now. And I'm not even being political in this. Like, you could make whatever side you want the victors. You could make any group of people the champions that pulled it all together and saved the day. Like, it could be, I think there's a lot of food for, I don't know, there's a lot of material.
A lot of sparks for sparks.
A lot of sparks for sparks there.
Is that the term you were reaching for?
Yeah, that's the one. It rolls right off the tongue. A lot of sparks for sparks there.
Whenever we say that, I can imagine people saying, stop using fetch. Fetch is not, but I'm never going to stop. Sparks is like Smurf.
Sparks.
And you can use it any way you want.
So use those sparks. Or you could write about a pandemic that is more likely to happen, perhaps an avian flu or an influenza that sweeps the world, much like the flu of 1918. which is what I would like to talk about today.
What a bait and switch. You were going to give me zombie sparks.
I was, but only because they are a virus. The way they're handled in World War Z is a virus.
But no, this is about the flu of when?
1918. And you may not know about it.
Almost like 100 years.
You might have heard Spanish flu.
Yes.
Some people use that, but I'm going to tell you later why that's not accurate.
Is this the flu? Remember when we were interviewing Zachary Quinto and his grandfather?
That's right.
Or great-grandfather was...
I believe it would be great or great-great. Yes, I'm going to talk about that too.
Awesome.
Yes.
Awesome.
That's exactly it. That is the flu that we speak of today. The great influenza.
Bring her on.
So a bunch of things led that are tied in here besides the book I already mentioned, The Great Influenza by John M. Barry, Flu by Gina Colada, This Podcast Will Kill You, the documentary The Influenza of 1918. So for those of you who don't know, the flu of 1918 killed 5 to 10% of the world's population within a few months.
That's so many.
Boom. Estimates range from 50 million to 100 million people died.
Oh,
for reference, the number of people killed in World War I was 17 million. This flu has killed more than World War I, World War II, Vietnam War, and several other wars all together.
Oh my God, my jaw is hanging open.
So when we talk about or think about plagues, we often think about AIDS, Ebola, anthrax spores, and of course, Black Death or the Black Plague, which is Middle Ages, right? We had a whole section of that in school.
And my spark about the Ars Moriendi, the art of dying well, yeah, that's the Black Death was right before the Ars Moriendi was written, and that was written in the 1500s. So
I was going to say that plague I thought was like somewhere between 12 and 1400s. Maybe.
Girl, if you were looking to me for confirmation,
I was.
You just as readily look to my dog, Kitty Bunny.
All right. Well, that's how many people.
I wish Kitty was our fact checker. That'd be amazing. Give her a job to
tell us, please. So the Great Flu epidemic killed at least 50 million people virtually overnight, like within a few weeks.
Amazing. That's crazy.
What was really crazy about this particular flu is that the people who were targeted were the strongest and most able-bodied among us.
What?
20-year-olds, 30-year-olds, 40-year-olds.
No, it's usually children and elderly people.
That's right.
Why?
Do not know.
No kidding.
Do not know.
I thought you were going to tell me.
Nope.
You're not going to tell me?
I don't know. I mean, we can ponder it later after I've told you more, but we're just going to be pondering. Do not know. So this plague was so deadly that if a similar virus were to strike today, it would kill more people in a single year than heart disease, cancers, strokes, chronic pulmonary disease, AIDS, and Alzheimer's combined.
God.
But for years afterwards, this plague was almost completely forgotten. Like people, I didn't learn about it. I don't know. Most people that I know don't know about it. And a couple of years ago, I read a book called Flu, The Story of the Great Influenza Pandemic of 1918 and the Search for the Virus That Caused It by Gina Colada. And at that time, I could not stop talking about this book. Probably a lot of people were like,
easy cam, man.
Yeah, you can zip it on that. You really, party conversation.
Like really kill it at a cocktail party.
I'm telling you.
Have you read this book, Flu? And people are like, I'm just going to get some crudité.
Or like someone would reach for a Kleenex and be like, have you read Flu? Like it's not when you want to be talking about it.
Yes.
But recently, like you said, we were talking with Zachary Quinto for one of our Makersodes, in case you missed it. And he mentioned that one of his ancestors, I think it was great-great-grandfather perhaps, was killed in 1918. Yes. And it's funny because I was reading this article in Jezebel, and the article was a conversation with the author of Pale Rider, the Spanish flu of 1918. Her name's Laura Spinney. And she was talking about how a lot of people vaguely recall that someone in their family may have died from the flu, but they don't know the details. It's all a little hazy because we haven't really created a collective memory for ourselves, for the world.
Wow.
Kind of the way, World War II has many of them, and World War Z, which didn't actually happen, has one.
Yet.
But we haven't created a collective memory,
Mm-hmm.
And so I started to wonder about that, like why I learned about the bubonic plague and I didn't learn about the flu of 1918. It kind of also reminds me of like Hamilton, who lives, who dies, who tells your story. And in the past, of course, we know like it was primarily men who wrote the history books. It was the male point of view. It was more visible. So the men were the doctors and the politicians, of course. But also more men than women died.
That's what I was going to say.
And couldn't live to tell the story.
Uh-huh.
So more men died in the pandemic. The women were the ones who were like nursing the sick, taking care of each other's families, putting out the sheets to signify death at the house, laying out the dead, taking in the orphans. And there were millions of orphans. They didn't have time
to write the history book.
That's right.
They had their hands full.
We can assume that they were talking to each other and that, that history may not have been written down, but they were the ones who saw it up close and personal. And I think that there could be a very female story in here to be told. Some sparks, just putting those sparks out there. And speaking of the history of it and how it's been told or not told, part of the issue is that the flu broke out during World War I, and many countries did not want their populations to panic any further than they already were. So they didn't tell the truth. I'll get to more of that later, but they didn't tell the truth. They didn't report on it in the early stages.
Oh my gosh.
Or they didn't respond quickly enough because they didn't want people to freak out. There was one country that allowed it to be talked about openly and in their newspapers and everything, and that country was Spain, because their king was also struck with the flu. He didn't die, but that meant that a lot of the information that people were getting about it was coming out of Spain, and led them to believe incorrectly that it started in Spain and has now stuck to this day. A lot of people still call it Spanish flu.
Yeah, but really it's just that they were disseminating the most information and talking about it the most openly.
That's right.
Wow.
That's right.
And so they get the flu named after them.
Yay. Yay, Spain. So it has taken nearly 100 years to piece together what we do know about it, but we believe at this point that this flu began in Kansas, a small town in Kansas.
You are kidding me.
I'm not.
Wow.
I'm not. There are records in the spring of 1918 that a country doctor who would really serve the region, not just this small town in Kansas, but the areas of Oklahoma and beyond, he started to see some very severe flu symptoms in the spring of 1918. And this was a time when none of this influenza and flu was not tracked. So no one had records of this. But nonetheless, it disturbed him so much that he did write to the government and say, I've got this situation here and I'm seeing these things I thought you should know. So he writes that letter and then nothing happens. A few months later, the flu starts to settle down and it looks like it might be dying off, but it doesn't die off before two young men travel from their small town to Fort Funston, also in Kansas, because they had enlisted in the Army.
Fort Funston sounds fun.
It sounds fun. Funston.
But not so fun when those two dudes bring that flu.
That's right. So they went off to the Army. But nonetheless, like there wasn't a lot more buzz in the springtime about it.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah.
So it's not the Spanish flu. That's that name is erroneous. Does it have a name besides the Great Flu pandemic of
the Great Influenza?
So it really is just flu.
Yes.
It's a really bad strain of influenza.
That's right. That's right.
it.
And we'll talk a little bit more about it, but it's avian flu. They think it came from a bird.
Bird
And that
flu.
mutates. It could mutate through other animals and eventually get to humans.
Could this happen again?
Yes, it can. But we're jumping ahead.
Okay. Shit got real, and
That's
it's not so funny when it could happen again.
That's right. It's not funny.
Yeah.
It's really not. I know I'm laughing, but it's not funny.
Yeah.
So they thought it had ended for now. Anyway, they being the few people who were worrying about it, because it wasn't like a bunch of people were tracking it in the spring of 1918. A quote from The Great Influenza by John M. Barry. The virus had not disappeared. It had only gone underground, like a forest fire left burning in the roots, swarming and mutating, adapting, honing itself, watching and waiting to burst into flame.
Oh my God.
That not only describes the flu of 1918, but also will be the answer to anyone who asks me about a creative idea that I haven't been working on lately. It's gone underground. It's just wait. It's mutating. It's waiting and watching to burst into flames. Thank you, John Barry, for that quote. So it had gone underground, and we don't see or hear anything else about it until the fall of 1918, and it comes back with a vengeance. It comes back at Camp Devens just outside of Boston, and it's crazy.
Boston.
Yeah. So
it's possible that some military man or,
that's exactly right.
But when you were saying that it struck people of that sort of like core age group, is it possible that it could have been spread through the military?
It's
like
100%.
strapping young men.
It's 100%. That's one of the biggest reasons. It's very common in most wars that more soldiers will die of disease than actually die from the war itself.
Oh, man.
That's common.
Yeah.
But then with something like this that comes on fast and hard and furious, there's almost no way to stop it. So at Camp Devens, like in one day, 162 soldiers fall ill, and then it just skyrockets from there.
162 soldiers in one day.
And then hundreds more every day. And so
how could they even keep up?
They
with
couldn't.
it? Yeah.
They couldn't. And then they're just piling more people on people. The military did issue a warning around then to say, hey, don't be shipping people between forts at this time if you don't have to.
Yeah.
But it was already too late.
Yeah.
People had already left, and they can track that far more than I'm going to right now. They can literally say 12 hours before that memo came in, these guys left on a train and took it here.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So in order to understand how it all happened, you really have to understand a couple things. Number one is we're in the middle of World War I. Yes, it's all the military moving around, but also people are tired, they're displaced, they're stressed.
Their defenses are down.
All of it. And then number two, this is not a time when people truly believed in medicine. There's an entire 20 books to read on what the state of the medical world was in. At this time, our medical universities didn't require any sort of training to get in. You didn't have any tests. If you could pay for the classes, got into medical school. And in fact, the professors were paid only by the number of students, each student pays $100 or, whatever it is. So they would want more people in their classes, qualified or not. It literally meant nothing. And there was very, very little respect for medicine, except for there was a group of elite guys. I say guys, sorry, because mostly it was men, but these men would travel to Germany for the most part and other countries to study medicine in a more quote unquote real way. But America had not caught up to that yet. We were still there was no vaccines. People were not sure, literally the argument over whether bacteria existed or not.
Okay.
Viruses, people agreed they existed, but they didn't know if they caused disease or not. So we're really living in a strange time, and it wasn't as though people really trusted medicine.
But you know what's scaring me as you tell this story? Anti-vaxxers.
I know.
Yeah, because I feel like, are we going to unnecessarily be revisiting these times because of what sort of feels like a social movement?
Yes.
That's maybe not based in hard science.
It's very, very possible. And that's why I think the time is right. We just lost a bunch
of anti-vaxxer listeners, but sorry, you were going to say.
No, I'm 100% with you.
Yeah, it's scary.
It's very scary. That's why we're ripe for someone to write about this, in a new and in a fresh way. People don't know about this, but because of this flu, we now have flu vaccinations.
Yes.
It took forever, but we got them.
Had them developed,
eventually.
And now you can go to any drugstore and get a free flu vaccine.
That is correct. That is correct.
Wow.
So let me tell you a little bit more about other reasons why we were just primed and ready for this. One place that was hit particularly hard was Philadelphia. They had a huge death rate. And part of that was because their politicians resisted putting any public measures in place. They were warned that, hey, we think a couple of guys who just got shipped to here or there, may now be in your city and you may have something on your hands. And they had a parade planned for 2 days later in Philadelphia. And the parade was to raise money to sell war bonds, and they needed the fundraising. Again, it's this mixture of World War I and this epidemic that's happening. And so these are some interesting characters. You could look up the guys who were running the city of Philadelphia at that time, because they made the determination to let the parade go on as planned.
So all those people were interacting with each other in close quarters.
That's exactly right.
Just spreading that flu.
Within 24 to 48 hours after that parade, literally people started dropping like flies.
Getting sick, not dying right away, but just getting really, really sick and then dying.
That's right.
Shit.
But the death could come within 6 to 12 hours. You could see your neighbor and say, good morning, have a great day. And you could hear, by the time you got home from work, you could hear that person fell ill and died.
Oh my God.
That's right.
This is like a mega flu.
It's like a mega flu.
Jeez,
what happens to you is it's also brutal. It's like severe fever, delusional. You're bleeding from your eye sockets, your ears, your nose. There's bloody foam coming out of your mouth.
Oh my God.
Your skin turns blue, like a dark, dark blue, almost black. It's like the Black Plague, basically.
Oh my God.
Oh my God, right? Now, not everyone died within 6 hours. Some people took longer, but I can't imagine that was any better.
This is a nightmare.
So the city of Philadelphia, they allow the parade to go on. People start getting sick, and hospitals are overloaded, filled. There's nowhere to go to get help. There was no help to get. A couple days after the parade, 156 people died in Philadelphia. They write a report and they say, well, that was bad, but it looks like we're through the worst of it. The next day, 250 people die.
Oh.
And they're like, that really, really was it. The following day, 450 people die.
Oh
so it was literally you motherfuckers. At no point did they just did not want to admit that they were wrong.
That's crazy. And I'm also just how did they handle just the body, the stacks of
dead bodies stayed in people's homes until they could figure out what to do with it.
Riddled with influenza.
There is a story on the CDC website that is a gravedigger. This is how much it wiped out in certain cities. If you had a family of 6, you might lose 3 to 4 of your family members. It was so bad in these concentrated areas.
Oh my gosh.
So there's a story of a gravedigger who was at the beginning of the day, I was told to dig 3 graves for this family that I knew. It was a family of 6. Lunchtime, someone stops by and says, dig a 4th. Middle of the afternoon, I'm told, dig a 5th. And by that evening, I was told, dig the 6th grave.
Jesus.
The entire family. So yes,
is
you're
that
living.
apocryphal or is that a real?
It's a real story on the website. It's a real account. It's a real account.
Gosh.
Now, obviously, not every family lost everyone, but this is part of why the story didn't get handed down. You might have lost half of your family members.
Who tells your story?
Who tells your story? Or maybe the kids survive, but the kids aren't old enough to understand. They get adopted by someone else, and then your family history, may not have been.
This is blowing
shared.
my butt off. This is so crazy.
It is nuts. It's totally, totally nuts. They would put different colored sheets up on the front door of a house to let you know whether an infant or a small child had died, or if an adult had died, or if an elder had died. So you might see, and then you might see numerous sheets hanging on it. So you're walking down your streets, and there's pictures from this time too. There's no one on the streets because eventually
people get wise.
But the cities who were doing what they were supposed to do, and eventually, like Baltimore and Philadelphia, catch up with it. They have curfews. They ban meetings of any kind. You have to wear masks to go outside. Like they eventually get with the program. New York City was like on top of that from the beginning.
Interesting.
So good grades for New York City. But yeah, the other thing with like people staying in their homes was the hospitals were full, but there was also nothing much that could be done for you. Like they had aspirin and they had behavior modification. That was about it. Like quarantine.
Yes.
Stay away from sick people, keep them hydrated.
This is a nightmare.
That's a nightmare.
This is a living nightmare.
Now, interestingly, there were certain countries I had previously, for anyone I told this information to before when I was rambling about that book, I was incorrect about something.
At that cocktail party.
I'm sorry. I used to say Australia was the only country that survived,
like
the flu unscathed. Yeah. Because they closed their borders to incoming ships, which they did do in 1918. But they opened their borders apparently a little too soon because by the spring of 1919, the flu had hit there, and 40% of the population of Australia ultimately died. 40%.
That's so many percents.
It's so many percents. It's so many percent.
Crazy. That reminds me of in the Marvel universe when Thanos like decides that like he's gonna get the Infinity Stones, and then half of the world is gonna die. That's 40%. That is exactly
right. I was going to talk about, I don't have it in here, but I was thinking about talking about the places where you can see when you're watching a show and you're like, oh, it's 1918. If it's a historical show like Downton Abbey.
Yeah.
Carson got sick and the Dowager, I think, got sick. And so did Matthew's wife, Lavinia. But
she died.
She died, which was accurate.
Spoiler, but
from 4 years ago. Probably,
Hashtag 4-year-old spoiler.
4-year-old spoiler. But she died, which was not only a shocking plot twist, but was accurate for that disease. She would have been the one who died.
Because she was young?
I
don't get it. I don't get how old crusty Carson the butler and how old Dakotas could live and Lavinia could die. But.
It's because if it's the same way vaccines work, which is why it's so scary that we're not all buying into this. If you have had a bit of the flu before, or a bit of the strain or a similar strain of the flu, you are most likely to
To
be
weather.
less
Yeah.
susceptible.
So if you're Carson or the Dowager Countess, you
That's
may
right.
have had a little touch of it before.
That's right. And if you're really young, you may have had a little touch of it as it grew into what it eventually grew into.
Man, that's crazy. So there are other pieces of creativity where we've seen some of this represented.
That's right.
I don't think the flu is what people dropped dead of in the Marvel universe.
I think it was
Is that what Thanos
inspired by that. Yeah, I do. So interestingly enough, there's another little story within here that I think is fascinating and goes to sort of the medical field and how hard. There's a million sparks. If you read any of the books that I mentioned, there are a million sparks within them. There are female scientists. There are male scientists whose work, literally us living today in a world where we don't worry every day about flu, hinges on the work that they did.
Really?
So it's so worth reading that. But I'll mention this story that I think is really fascinating. So first of all, I just mentioned Australia and 40% of their population. There were places, for example, there was a village in Alaska, Brevig Mission, Alaska, where there were only 80 inhabitants in this village.
Oh, bless.
72 people died. So it was their tribe of people. 72 people died. Now, happy to report those people still exist.
Oh, amazing.
And that village exists, but that village ultimately played a huge part in helping to reduce the possibility of this particular strain of flu happening again. And I'll tell you how. In the 50s, so in the 50s, we're, 30-ish years, 30...
I'm bad at math, but okay.
30-ish years since the
big
actual flu outbreak. There is a PhD student at the University of Iowa named Johann Holton. And he said he was present when a visiting scientist happened to be passing by. And he said something like, someone ought to go up north, find a person who died from the virus and get their tissue, since the permafrost probably would have preserved it.
Wow.
Johann says, oh my God, I want that to be my thesis. Can I? And he immediately goes and asks for permission. Can I do that? I want to be the person who goes there. So he goes to Alaska and he arrives in this village. It is a matriarchal society. So he needs to speak to the woman in charge. And he explains to all of them that all of those bodies had been buried in a mass grave, which was also common. There are, when you ask the question of like, where did all the bodies go? Most cities ran out of coffins within 2 days. And they were like, you're going to get wrapped in a sheet.
And
set
into a mass grave.
So they had a mass grave here in Alaska, and he had to ask them permission to open it back up. And he spent some time with them, and they ultimately said yes. And so in the 50s, he went and he had an expedition of, people helping him, but he went and captured tissue from several different sources in that grave. It was very, very exciting. He thanked them profusely. It was very meaningful. He takes the tissue back, and along the way, they stop multiple times to try to just make sure that it stays frozen. And he brings it all the way back to Iowa, and nothing. They don't get anything from it. They can't.
Not a hit.
Nothing to retrieve from it, or it was like the virus was dead. Because they were hoping they could find live virus. So the virus was dead, and that was it. He didn't have a thesis. He was pretty depressed. He thought he was going to be contributing something pretty great. So cut to 40 years later. It's now 1997. And he reads an article in a science journal authored by Jeffrey Taubenberger, that explains how he was a molecular pathologist and he found some sources in the archives. They had like little slices, when
like on a
preserved, like on a little plate.
Like a little glass plate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he was trying to, and now our technology had advanced in the last 40 years that the virus didn't have to be alive. The virus could be dead and he could still piece it together.
Oh my gosh.
Like puzzle pieces.
Like puzzle pieces. So Johann's trip was not for naught.
No, that's not where he found it.
Oh.
No. He found it like in soldiers, in like the samples that he had were from soldiers.
Okay.
But Holton contacts Jeffrey and says, I know where you can find, yes, I know where you can get more samples. So they make their way. Now he's 72 years old.
Say that he's old.
He's 72 years old, but he's so excited that he may be able to still, make a major contribution. They go back to Alaska. This village obviously has changed quite a bit, and the same people are not in charge. But the woman in charge is the granddaughter of the woman who gave, I'm going to get choked up, who gave him permission the first time. And once he realizes that, he knows he's going to be able to talk to her about her grandma and the connection that they had the first time. And so she ultimately says, yes, you can open it back up a second time.
Wow.
But he says, the people of this village, you are playing an essential part.
Yeah, it's a huge gift.
The betterment of the world. So they go and they get more samples, and ultimately the virus, it was like 13,000 pieces of this virus, but they had to put back together like a puzzle.
Puzzles.
And they ultimately did, so that they could figure out what this flu was. And this is how we know that they think it was a bird flu.
Wow.
And as you may have noticed in recent years, there have been several variations of bird flu, also known as avian flu.
Yep.
So every single person who knows anything about this related to science is like, it will happen again. It's not a matter of like if. It just when will it happen?
Wow.
And I think that from the book Flu, one of the most interesting and sparkish things for me was like learning more about the people whose job it is to trace down. They're like detectives. Every day, these people get reports of who went into various hospitals with what symptoms. Is there anything unusual? If those people left this hospital, where did they travel to? Where might they be?
Forensic and scientific.
That's right. And detective.
Yeah.
I think there could be there could be a TV show. It's like CSI, but it's the CDC, and you're tracking down like potential infectious diseases. I think that could be. I think that could be awesome. Or certainly we need more characters that's what they do, right? That's interesting work.
It is like a real life boogeyman nightmare.
It is. It is. So in World War Z, which I now look to as my, my guidebook, I think he wrote a guide for surviving the zombie apocalypse. I actually think Max Brooks wrote that before World War Z.
It might be useful.
It could be useful. But in World War Z, again, spoiler, but they learned how to bypass getting eaten by zombies by infecting themselves with fatal but curable diseases, because they found that the zombies would not want to.
The zombies could smell it.
Yeah. They didn't want to eat anything that already had a fatal disease. They wanted the healthiest among us.
Yeah.
So they would infect themselves with a fatal but curable disease so that the zombie wouldn't choose them as a host.
Again, hashtags 8-year spoiler alert.
8-year spoiler alert. But I can't help but think about how similar that is to vaccines now, and just getting, injected with a little bit of the flu might strengthen your immunity system against it. And it feels like that whole,
is the spark for this whole spark, get your flu shot?
it's weird because as I said that, I was like, this one was sponsored by Walgreens.
No.
Come in and get your flu shot.
Actually, while you're talking, all I'm thinking of is like all of those pieces of literature and television shows that have this sort of the looming threat, whether it is the Marvel universe, what does it look like if half of the world's population just all of a sudden drops dead? Like it's, oh my God, it's real life scary and it's fascinating.
It is.
It's rich.
It's really, really rich.
And also who lives, who dies, who tells your story. Like that something could happen that could be so earth rocking that there wouldn't be enough hands left to tell the story.
And no one's
this is a
that
true story.
This is a true story.
That has not been well documented and covered. Though it's but those books sound great. So it's Flu is the book that you
was
can't
the original.
Stop talking about at cocktail parties.
That was my big winner.
Yeah.
And then The Great Influenza by John M. Barry. I also listened to an episode of This Podcast Will Kill You.
This Podcast Will Kill You.
I think it was their season 1 first episode.
Yes.
And then there's a documentary called The Influenza of 1918. And there's so much more. There's so many more books about it.
Not enough. Like I don't know.
They're all more recent because as we can finally put some of these pieces together, think about that. They only got those samples in 1997.
I know.
And it took them like 13 years to assemble and figure out what do we have here. So we're really still kind of fresh in being able to assess what it is.
I want to say thank you to all of those scientists, investigators who, to Johan and the people that dedicate their lives to, tracking this stuff down, trying to keep us safe.
There's a bunch of sparks and in the human beings who fought this and basically fought at that time against the idea, like the question about medicine was really like spiritual versus science, and they had to convince people that this science wasn't it wasn't going to threaten your spirituality, but that these things do exist. Bacteria does exist. Viruses do exist.
Yeah.
And I think that, like you said before, one of the scariest things to take away from all of this is like, are we back in a moment where we are questioning whether these things are real?
Yeah. So everybody go, like after all of this work that people have done, the very least you could do is go get your flu shot, get your vaccines.
That's right. We don't need diseases that have already been eradicated to come back. We've got, people looking. And I want to say also thank you to the people who are literally searching for those viruses that are happening right now, because part of their job is to make sure that if something does happen, we have vaccines ready. Little scary note, there's not enough of anything. If anything actually happened, there's not enough of anything for everyone.
I've waited too long to get my flu vaccine before, and they're like, we're out.
Well, boom.
There you go.
There you go. That's me spark for today.
Oh, and it's a scary.
It's a little spooky.
The thing I like about it though too, and World War Z is a good example of this, but I'm sure there are many others. This could be a good horror novel, movie, TV show. Like I feel like there's other ways for this real life scary to live.
And to me, that was another success of World War Z, that I don't go see horror movies. So it was like a horrifying idea for people who don't even watch horror intentionally.
You know how easily scared I am. Do you think I could watch it?
Yes.
Oh,
Because it's cerebral. Like that's what I mean. Like the way into it is scary.
but are there jump scares? Are zombies going to jump out at me?
There's a couple jump scares. There's a couple, but there's also more just like tension, and there's some real intellectual engagement. What I didn't spoil one of the biggest things.
Okay.
Like, yeah.
Well, maybe we could watch it and you could sit next to me and be like,
I'll do it.
Like there's about to be a zombie that's going to pop out of that linen closet.
Yes.
Can we do that?
Yeah. I'll do it.
Great. We'll do it now on this break. See you in a minute. Just so if you're listening at home in your car on the treadmill, I want you to know that it is a sort of a cloudy day. That sound that you hear, I have so many puppies in my lap right now.
Perfect, sweet pups.
Podcasting.
But they're so quiet in this episode because
they're so loud in the
up.
last episode. But
they're
we're
so
snuggled up,
happy.
and we're going to just keep them that way. So
I'm so excited to hear your spark.
Okay, great.
Yay.
The title of my spark is A Storytelling of Writers. My spark sources include a New Yorker article. My spark sources include a New Yorker article by Caradwyn Dovey, whose name I cannot stop saying in my head over and over again. Caradwyn Dovey. A conversation with the writer Jonathan McLean, conversation with writers Emma McLaughlin and Nicola Krauss, the website groupfiction.net, writingforums.com, babbel.com, unleadedwriting.com, and amazon.com.
Woo!
All the fucking .coms.
All the .coms in this one.
So I was having a conversation with a coaching client of mine who has wanted to write a novel for some time, like years. She's wanted to write this novel and has taken some swings at it. But one of the things that has held her back is her feeling that writing alone feels like punishment. For her to be productive and happy when she's writing, she thrives with an accountability / discussion partner, or as our friend Gavin Creel would call it, a sponge presser. So she may be sitting there looking to write out, but if a good artistic collaborator just presses her sponge, honey, a lot of nummy creative juices flow out of her.
Interesting.
Yeah. So while other forms of writing like screenwriting, TV writing, etc., and many forms of creativity have plenty of models for group collaboration, novel writing has been pretty much viewed as a singular activity for one creator with a personal, solitary vision, right?
Yep.
Then I got my sparks on when I read this article in the New Yorker written by Caradwyn Dovey. Now you can have it as an earworm in your head too.
Caradwyn Dovey.
Caradwyn Dovey. I love that name. And the article was called, Can You Write a Novel as a Group?
Ooh.
Yes.
Interesting.
Yes. In it, Caradwyn tells the stories of 3 fiction writing collectives on 3 different continents who have enjoyed success with their collaborative writing, along with the ups and downs that come with any collaboration. I loved this article because it helped to dismantle this story that I have bought into about certain art forms being solitary.
Yes. I'm having a strange deja vu that someone somewhere in one of our circles mentioned something about a collaborative. When you mentioned it was like multi-continent.
Yeah.
It's fascinating, but it's so rare. You just don't
hear a lot about it. So Caradwyn's article, Caradwyn's article begins with a group of book club ladies in Sydney, Australia, who called themselves the Book Sluts. Yes, which is a spark. And their motto was, "We'll read anything," which I fucking love. You know, this is a side spark. I love the idea of creating. This goes also to my desire to have something like a monthly open house or something. But I love the idea of creating a great book club or an unbooked club like my friend Ashley Gromans is part of, or a Spark File chapter or something where you get together, you drink wine, you explore different sparks.
Yes.
I'm into this might be a little business spark for us. Is like,
I like it.
So / social, like a monthly chapters of the Spark File that get together and exchange sparks. But that's another spark for another spark.
Yeah. I'm so into it. I'm totally into it.
So
we're doing that.
The Book Slut ladies were on a weekend away, and 6 of the group's 8 regular members were talking about the book club's upcoming 10th anniversary. And they were dreaming of celebrating their 10 years together with a ride on the Trans-Siberian Railway. And they joked that they could finance the trip by writing a novel together. right? So they're book clubbing it. They're discussing, I believe the book was Crime and Punishment. They're drinking. And then they start just jokingly pitching potential plots for their book slut novel. All the while, they're just partying. They're laughing. They're partying. They're laughing. They're having a great time. And the next morning, these book slut ladies went out and they bought great big sheets of paper and Sharpies, and they spent the day brainstorming, and they decided that they were going to write a romance set in the Australian outback, and they agreed on the backstory of their heroine. They broke the fucking story.
I fucking love these women.
Right? Yes. You will only fall more and more deeply in love.
Okay.
So they headed home from this weekend away with assigned scenes that they were meant to write. And then everyone was really fucking surprised when the completed scenes started arriving in each other's email boxes.
Oh!
Yeah. So a few months later, there was a core group of 5 women who settled into this writing collective. Jenny Crocker, Madeline Oliver, Jane Richards, Jane St. Vincent Welch, and Denise Tart. A few of them had journalism or comedy writing experience, but some of them had absolutely no writing experience at all, right?
Awesome.
Take heart. But what they did have after being in the book club for 10 years was this practice of getting together, dissecting novels, and then confidently sharing their opinions with the group in an environment of respect.
Yes.
Side spark. We know from the Project Aristotle research that Google conducted that balanced conversational turn-taking in an environment of psychological safety is the foundation for a strong team dynamic / collaboration. But again, that's another spark for another spark. So I know there's so much in the spark. For the next 3 years, these ladies met at least once a week, and they wrote in their free time between their full-time jobs and their family duties. So calling all people who feel like they don't have the capacity to make stuff. These ladies were making stuff. They had all full-time jobs. They had families. They had children, all of it. And they were carving out a little bit of time for them to do this collaborative writing together.
That's amazing.
Isn't it?
That reminds me of that. What's that saying?
I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying it's easy, but
isn't there some meme that's like Beyonce has the same 24 hours in a day as you do?
Oprah has the same 24 hours a day.
The book sluts have the same 24 hours a day.
I know.
I'm impressed.
And it could be argued that people have support. They have,
of course,
nannies, and they have housekeepers and all of that. And I agree with that. But it is also, there's some truth in there. So they said that the erotic passages were tough to write at first because there's a little eroticism in this book. But so at first, each of the 5 ladies anonymously submitted a version of the book's first sex scene, but they knew each other so well that they could totally figure out who had written it. And even more to the point, they totally disagreed about what was legit steamy. Because everybody has their own thing that turns their crank. So the first sex scene that made it into the book blended all of their versions.
Oh, I bet that was one hell of a scene.
And I love this. With time, they became more confident about how they talked about and wrote about sex. That in and of itself, I love.
Yeah.
I love that these 5 ladies, just by like practicing writing about it and talking about it, it started being like the less, I don't know, taboo. I love that.
So does he lick his ear, or does she?
Or does he just get fisted right up the ass? Like I love it.
Oh,
yes, Camion. Yes, I love it.
No, you didn't.
Yes. Hi, Mom, if you're listening. So.
I'm sorry, Betty, if you're listening.
This made me laugh so hard. They were careful about how they labeled their documents and email attachments in case their teenage children got snoopy. So one of the 5 writers said that washing machine instructions was a really good document name because we knew no 15-year-old would open the document.
That's awesome.
I fucking love that. So throughout all sorts of life changes, moves, new jobs, illnesses, and their families and friends' fascination and skepticism about the longevity of the collaboration, the women kept writing and kept writing and kept writing together because for them it was, and I think this is key to this spark, it was fun and exhilarating to create something together.
Yes.
Yes to all my sponge pressers. This one goes out to Laura Camion. So,
Blackwell, I love you.
In late 2013, they sent their manuscript entitled The Painted Sky to one publisher. And that publisher responded with, I read your book. could not put it down. They picked out a pen name for the group. The pen name is Alice Campion. Their publisher recommended a C name, Campion, because the publisher wanted a surname that would place the book at eye level. And this is very good news for you and me, Susan Blackwell and Laura Campion, when we read our book.
Yes.
So these writers,
Holy
who now call
crap.
themselves the Alices, after the pen name Alice Campion, celebrated by beginning work on the sequel.
Come
that?
on. Did they take that train trip? I want to know.
I don't know. That's a good question.
I love these ladies.
They're fun ladies. And we'll hear more about these ladies in a second. So around the same time in Cape Town, South Africa,
Okay.
3 other ladies were having a boozy brunch. I don't know if alcohol is a key spark in this equation. And they decided to write a sort of a series of choose your own adventure erotic novels. Did you ever read choose your own adventure books, Camion?
Not so much.
Okay, so a choose your own adventure book is like you start reading them and you get to a point where they say, if you want to open up the castle door, turn to page 23.
Yeah.
If you want to turn back and go back into the woods, turn to page 48. And it's sort of like a decision-making tree.
Yeah.
And sometimes you win the pot of gold, and sometimes you win the hand of the fair maiden, and sometimes you die at the breath of a dragon. Right. But they wanted to make a choose your own adventure erotic novel.
Wow.
So these ladies, Helen Moffat, Sarah Lotz, and Paige Nick, chose the nom de plume Helena S. Page. From their bio on Amazon.com, I learned that they had more experience as writers. Helen is a freelance writer, editor, academic, and poet. Sarah is a screenwriter and novelist who also writes urban horror novels and co-authors a pulp fiction zombie series with her daughter. Hello. And Paige Nick is an author and advertising copywriter who also writes a weekly humorous dating column for the Sunday Times London. So on the way home from that boozy brunch, one of these writers started working up a scene in her head and started writing when she got home and did not stop writing until late that night. And then she emailed that writing to the other 2, and one of them, who is an insomniac, picked up the writing where she left off. And this is how they started relay writing.
Oh, I love it.
Yes, relay.
Night and day, literally.
Relay writing. I
Relay
love
writing.
it. Then the third called her agent and pitched their first book called A Girl Walks Into a Bar, Your Fantasy, Your Rules. That book has now sold in 21 countries.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
I'm so excited for all of them.
Yeah. So
How
throughout
awesome.
this process, they discovered that they had complementary skills, which I think is super important. We'll come back to it.
Yeah.
One of them became the plot mistress. One of them was the workhorse, just churning out pages. And one was the ruthless editor. So they had these sort of complementary skill sets, which I think is really key. I know we have that in our collaboration. Like there are things that you are super good at and have even bolstered your skill set in order to contribute it to the collaboration. And there are things that I'm better at or I've learned because we as a means to an end. And so it's so helpful.
It's so good.
It's good. In the New Yorker article, they described it as grueling and insanely fun. It was a project that none of them would have ever dreamed of doing alone, which is to say it's a project that could only exist because of the contribution that each of them made to the collective, that each of them made to the collaboration.
Yes.
Which I love.
I love that.
Though the article calls this collective the Helenas after their nom de plume, Helena S. Page, these authors started calling one another the elves, as in the story The Elves and the Shoemaker. The article said, do you know that story?
Yes, it's been a while.
Okay, so there's a poor shoemaker and he spends his last little coins to buy some leather to make some shoes, and he goes to bed that night, and when he wakes up, he finds that the shoes that he doesn't know who, but the shoes have been cobbled.
Yeah.
So the next night he leaves leather out and he comes and the shoes have been cobbled, and he ends up selling the shoes and making enough money to,
Yeah.
So they started calling each other the elves. The article said, writing a novel as a group when it's going well can feel almost magical, as the book seems mysteriously to grow and grow overnight apart from any individual effort.
That is
Isn't that great?
amazing.
Now, I feel like that's like when collaboration is at its best. There
Yeah.
are times when it's hard, but that's when it's at its best.
I paused because I thought you might be following that sentence with a, the other side of the coin.
We'll get there. The Helenas also formed a pact that if any of them died during the writing process, one of the others would immediately delete the browser history from their computer. Hashtag washing machine instructions. So, but of course, the Alices and the Helena elves aren't the first writing collective. More than 20 years ago, a group of Italian men were part of an artist activist network that collaborated on countercultural pranks against the mainstream media establishment.
What?
Yes. So it's these group of artist activists in Italy. And in 1995, at a meeting of these artist activists, somebody suggested that as an experiment, they co-write a novel. And 4 men, Roberto Bui, Giovanni Catabrija, Luca De Meo, and Federico Guglielmi, volunteered and got down to work on what they called a meta-historical novel. These dudes were all from working class backgrounds. They had put themselves through university with working class jobs. None of them had previously written a novel, but they were used to collective effort as a means of resisting authoritarian and capitalist power structures. So like the Alices, they didn't have all the experience they weren't like seasoned writers and novelists, but they did have experience with collaborative interaction, which I think is key.
I love these guys.
I know.
These people.
Well, these guys all love to research historical periods. And this yes, Cammie, I know this is your jam. This is your jam. This informed their first novel entitled Q. What they essentially arrived at was a historical thriller. Caradwin says that the book reads a bit like a... Caradwin says, anytime her name appears in a sentence, I can't get through the sentence. Caradwin says that their book reads a bit like a Dan Brown book would read if it was written on acid. But I have to say, so if you've read the Da Vinci Code, which I love, I love a page turner.
I do too.
I love a page turner.
And you love acid. Investigator. And I love acid. So this is
Q is the book for you. I have to say the Amazon.com reviews are pretty fucking great. This is a quote. Yeah. Amazon.com review of Q. This is a goddamn rock star thriller of a novel about the Reformation, ranging from Wittenberg to Munster to Antwerp to Venice and all points in between. Yes, it's incredibly long, but the pacing and plotting are well done. That's Amazon review.
Right.
When Q was published in 1999 under the multi-user nickname Luther Blissett, it became a bestseller in Italy and was sold around the world. Then the group added a 5th member, Riccardo Pedrini, and they decided to call themselves Wu Ming, a name sometimes used by Chinese dissidents to sign political tracts, which means anonymous.
Wow.
Anonymous. Or if pronounced differently, it means 5 names.
Stop it.
5 names. Now, this reminded me of Hilma af Klint's spiritualist group, The 5. Yes. If you haven't listened to that episode, go back and give it a listen. And Zachary Quinto recently reminded me in a Marco Polo that his name, a translation of his last name, Quinto, is the 5. And he was sparked by that because he's obsessed with making something with the name the 5. It's a web of sparks, Cammie.
It's a web.
It's a web goddamn web of sparks. So the Wu Ming Collective went on to write more meta-historical novels together. All of the original Italian editions of their books can be electronically downloaded at no charge, right?
Wow.
Because they're artist activists. Today, 20 years later, Wu Ming consists of 3 members, Wu Ming 1, Wu Ming 2, and Wu Ming 4, and they meet once a week at Wu Ming 2's house, and they write and rewrite in the days between meetings, sharing their research via email. When they're deep into a novel, they meet every other day. They now manage to live off their writing, even though their books can be downloaded for free. Physical sales are strong.
Amazing.
Isn't this crazy?
Also, I need to know what happened to the other 2, Wu Ming.
We'll touch on it.
Okay.
We're going to touch on it because that's one of the downsides of what happens, when you're a collaborative writer. But first, I'm going to free POTUS from my sweatshirt. Pody.
Go, POTUS, go.
Run, Pody, run.
Come here,
Hold on
POTUS.
1 second. Okay. So Other notable group-written novels include The Floating Admiral, published in 1931. It was written by 13 members of the Detection Club, a group of mystery writers that included Agatha Christie. Each author would write one chapter. Another author wrote the paradoxical prologue, and yet another author tied up all the loose ends. So there was one author that just like went through and made sure that all the threads tied together.
That's nuts.
In addition, each of the authors provided their own solution in a sealed envelope, all of which appear at the end of the book.
No way. So you can read all of the possible endings?
All the possible endings. In 1969, 25 Newsday, this sparks me. 25 Newsday journalists published an erotic novel called Naked Came the Stranger under the name Penelope Ash, and it's deliberately badly written. They wanted to prove the point that any book could succeed if it was filthy enough. So this was the time of like Harold Robbins and all of those like steamies, and they were like 25 Newsday journalists.
What is the name of the book?
Naked Came the Stranger, and I found it on Amazon.
You didn't.
I do, and I want to read it.
You better pass it to me when you're
right.
done. Oh my God.
Here's a hashtag 50 year later spoiler alert. The novel became a bestseller.
No.
Yes. And I totally enjoyed reading the Amazon reviews of the book, and it really did make me want to read it.
That is awesome.
Because it is deliberately, it's total like a smut fest, but deliberately badly written, which I think sounds really funny. So the upside of collaborative fiction can seem so bountiful that one might begin to wonder why anyone would choose to do it alone, says Caradwin. If you're doing it right, you have a safe space to brainstorm and ping pong ideas. There's camaraderie, there's encouragement from others, there's the impetus to write better after reading a co-author's strong work, and there's accountability. Yep. And then there are the challenges. Having to share advances and royalties makes it even more difficult to make a viable living.
Sure.
Novels are typically viewed, as I viewed them, as a solo endeavor written from the heart. And the Alices said it's hard for the culture to get its head around the idea of the shared heart, which I thought was interesting.
Oh, that's really interesting. Shared heart, shared vision.
Yeah. Interpersonal dynamics can be challenging, as we know, as collaborators. And like life and love, one of the greatest risks is the pain of losing a member over a falling out or creative differences. And that is what happened to the Alice Campion Collective and the Wu Ming Collective.
It happened to Alice Campion too?
Yes. I love how invested you are and how sad you look right now.
I'm devastated because you really do have to have a certain amount of your shit together in order to make it happen in the first place. A lot of people can start collaborative projects, but they actually finished it. It succeeded. I don't want to see that fail.
Buckle in, Cameo.
Oh, what happened?
But is it a failure? Well,
I don't know.
Let's
tell me what happened. Yeah.
When the Alices had almost completed their first novel, The Painted Sky, after years of working together in remarkable harmony, one member of the group fell out. In the New Yorker article, that writer, Madeline Oliver, said, "The collaboration was both one of the most exciting and inspiring times of my life and one of the most painful. It hasn't soured me on collaborative writing, not at all. In fact, it taught me the importance of managing my own expectations and being honest." And she is now writing a memoir about the experience.
Ooh, interesting.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
And you can, you should read this New Yorker article. Yeah. It's a great read.
I want to, please.
So with the Wu Ming Collective, one writer dropped out because they were going through just a difficult personal situation. They didn't have any grudges against the other members of the group. And another left the group after years of growing estrangement. And with both, it sounds like the separation was very painful, very disorienting, very difficult. And it took a long time to recover and find their collaborative rhythm again.
Yeah.
Which reminded me, honestly, of any loss or breakup or even death.
That's right.
You know?
Yeah. I think you and I have talked about that before. Just, collaborations that break up for whatever reason, or friendships that break up. And oftentimes it's not so clear cut like a relationship. So you don't get to have maybe the conversations that you might have if you were in a romantic relationship.
It's incredibly, I have I have experienced this. It is incredibly painful.
It really
It is incredibly painful.
Yeah.
So I empathize with those artists.
Mm-hmm.
So then I was so sparked by this article.
Yeah.
I reached out to some writers who have written in partnership with another person to learn as much as I could.
Cool.
So first I spoke with Jonathan McLean. Jonathan is a writer and a performer who has also recorded a lot of audiobooks. And one of his audiobooks made its way into the ears of an erotica writer named J.A. Huss. Her name is Julie. Her pen name is J.A. Huss. So Julie listened to a sci-fi novel that Jonathan McLean had narrated just as she was about to produce an audiobook of one of her romance novels.
Mm-hmm.
And Julie asked if Jonathan would voice one of her audiobooks, and then he ended up voicing a bunch of them under a pseudonym.
Cool.
And he really came to know her style and her characters. And he asked if he could pitch a series she had written. She had written a series of books, and he asked if he could pitch them as a possible TV show. And then eventually she asked him if he'd like to write a book with her. And how about that for a meet cute?
Wow.
Isn't that crazy?
So amazing.
So I want to say this, my little sparklers, you don't know where these collaborators might be hiding, where they might lurking or
they
come
might
from.
be right in front of you, and all you have to do is reach out, you know?
It's true. It's true.
Can I just ask a quick question?
Sure.
So you said he did those books under a pseudonym. Is that because that's like voiceover porn or something?
I think it's a voiceover softcore porn.
Okay, just checking.
Yes, I think that's right. I think that's right. I'd have to double check.
I want to know about the TV show too.
Yeah. Well, there's more. So this led to a male-female writing duo for a long time. They had never met, who live remotely from one another and don't have a romantic relationship. But in a way, their writing relationship is super intimate. They interact every day, sometimes 2 to 3 hour phone calls every day. They turn in work to each other. And on the other hand, they know very little about each other's lives. It's amazing. It's fascinating. Jonathan did say he's not sure if writing together works if you're trying to write a deeply personal narrative, but he feels like it does work if you're telling stories in a very specific genre. Mm-hmm. That's something that I've heard repeatedly, like genre. Mm-hmm. This isn't like if you have a novel burning in your heart that you know what I mean?
Right.
Or
a
maybe
story that you
unless
want
it's
to
a
tell.
genre novel that you have burning in your heart.
Yeah.
Jonathan and Julie have now co-written 8 books together and are currently co-writing a TV pilot about writing a writing collaboration with a romance novelist.
Amazing.
So it's just like sparks on sparks. Then I spoke with Nicola Krauss and Emma McLaughlin, who over 15 years co-wrote the New York Times bestseller, The Nanny Diaries, and so many other books.
Wow.
Side spark cams, we have got to hang out with these ladies. Let's
make it happen.
Awesome. So Nikki and Emma met as students at NYU. They were aware of each other from this feminist theater class that they both took, but they actually met at an ATM at 86th and Lex. Totally out of the NYU context. NYU, for those of you who don't live in New York, is way downtown. That ATM at 86th and Lex was way uptown. And they were like, what are you doing up here? What are you doing up here? It's because they were both nannies. So they were fast friends and kindred spirits. They sounded like they had this like lightning bolt connection with each other.
Yeah.
Emma moved in with Nikki 72 hours later as roommates. They just this immediate, mad, passionate, cerebral connection, not romantic, but kind of everything else. So they fell in creative love with each other, but they had no idea they were going to make anything together. Emma described their younger selves as brutal, unformed animals. And they moved in with each other. They moved out. They broke each other's hearts. They drifted, but they kept running into each other at random places. And Emma said it was akin to running into an ex-lover. They would talk intensely. They'd embrace. They had this really strong connection. Then Nikki invited Emma to a play reading that she was holding at her apartment. And in the middle of the reading of this postmodern work was this monologue that Nikki had written about how she thinks. And Emma said it was the kind of work she had never heard before. So she was like, huh? Right? So they went on to say that nannying had really fucked both of them up. They were privy inside of these really aspirational worlds, the things that they were supposed to be wanting in life. And at the same time, they were seeing how unhappy these worlds were. Emma's mom had kept encouraging her to write the story. And that night, when she was sitting in Nikki's apartment and heard Nikki's play, she had this like lightning bolt. And the next day, she emailed Nikki. There was, they stressed at this point, there was no catharsis. There was no check-in about their previous friendship up and downs. They just met at Cozy. Remember Cozy?
Yes.
Sandwich shop, pour a little out. I loved Cozy. But they met at Cozy and they started to discuss nannying. And then they wrote in a way that they described as channeled. It sounded like Helm off Clint. Like they just hours and hours of channeling the story. And that writing, that channeled writing, became the prologue of the Nanny Diaries novel with very little alteration.
Wow.
Yeah. Get into this. Here is the timeline of their early collaboration. And I just want to say this caveat. Just because you write collaboratively or collectively with a partner or a group, these timelines are not guaranteed. Timelines may vary. Listen to this. In January 2000, they started writing together. By Easter, they had an agent. By July, they sold the book. In November, they handed in the first draft, and they worked through the editorial process by the following May. That's super fast.
And had either of them written a book before?
That's a good question. I don't think so.
Wow.
I don't think so, but I didn't ask them.
That's incredible.
You can ask them when we go to dinner. Great.
Okay. Oh, I can't wait.
I also think they'd be great guests.
Oh my God, yes.
The Spark File.
Yes.
Please.
So
So they described this, and I think this is an apt description, as a shotgun marriage. And they were not on solid ground when they had this creative baby. They dove in, and the whole thing quickly took on a life of its own. And they had to figure out how to build this new thing where they were operating as if they had one brain, one voice, one brand, one business. They were 26 years old.
Whoa.
When I think of my 26-year-old self, oh no. So they were 26 years old, and they were in the world together, rapidly becoming a global phenomenon and publicly navigating success. And they said it was a couple of years later when they finally explored the underpinnings of their personal relationship.
But they had the wherewithal to do it.
They sure did.
Mm-hmm.
So they described moments of inevitable tension. They said they had a blowout fight about once a year.
Oh.
About once a year, they'd have a big blowout fight. They hung up on each other maybe twice in 15 years. Not bad, not bad. They both went into therapy to support their relationship to each other, and both attested that they worked harder on their relationship than either of their marriages.
Wow.
They recounted this fight they had with each other where they had this fight over the phone, and then Emma left a wedding without her shoes in the rain to find Nikki, like a fucking romantic comedy. But Emma said something that made so much sense to me. Sex would have made it easier. Raising a child together would have made it easier. They were held together by this thing, this creative relationship that is so fragile. And the fact that it's a choice to be there makes it excruciating, because you can't, like if you're married, like if you have a child, or you can't walk out, like, so it made it harder. And it really spoke to something that I've always thought and said, which is collaboration is the hardest relationship because it has to check so many boxes, and you can't rely on romance to smooth things over.
Right.
Cams, when you and I have a little disagreement, I can't just turn to you and like kiss your face and say, baby, baby. No, we have to actually work through it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So not to sound like eHarmony, but it seems like a key dimension of their compatibility was that they both had this no stone left unturned quality. They were both committed to doing, this is what they said, doing whatever they had to do to be less afraid. So therapy, they did it. Long conversations, they did it. No stone left unturned.
Yes.
And I tell you, this sparks me. You and I have talked about this. Yeah. We've talked about, like, if we ever need to, going to therapy together. I think we should go before we
need to.
I think we should.
I love therapy.
Okay, great. Let's go.
I'm in it. And my therapist said you can come anytime, but we can also get a new therapist. We can get one we can go to yours. We can go to,
I would go to your therapist. I don't give a shit.
You'll love her.
What's her name?
Letitia.
Hi, Letitia. I look forward to meeting you in person. Does she listen to the podcast? Doubtful. Okay.
She actually asked me if it would be okay if she followed. Like she's very much like, because I sent her the email and she was like, I just want to check with you. Is that, and I'm like, yes, I totally.
We need more listeners. Yes. Could you subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes? Great. I love it. I can't wait to see her. That'll be great.
No, we've talked a lot about that. And I think we were thoughtful going into it. I mean, and we've known each other for 20 years. So
yeah, but I always think we could do better.
Yeah. So what are you trying to say? What can I do better?
No. I'm very aware of what I can do better.
I'm joking.
Emma and Nikki talked about housekeeping, which sounded like a little bit of a safe word for them, housekeeping. When they would start to get short with each other, it was a sign to them that there was stuff building up. And one of them would say, can we have a housekeeping meeting? And for survival, they constantly had to separate out and work on their friendship, their partnership, their creative work, and their business. Friendship, partnership, creative work, business. So they really, that's that no stone left unturned piece, which I think is so important. I know we're busy. I know we have our work list is never ending. And yet it seems like the most important thing, like any good relationship.
Yeah.
You know?
Absolutely.
They also talked about having vision check-ins, which I'm renaming vision checkups because I like that. But it was to make sure that their visions were still in alignment, to make sure that, so they had to keep checking in and saying, where do you want to see us in a year? Where do you want to see us in 3 years and 5 years? What kind of money do we need to be bringing in? Where's your mortgage at? Where's my mortgage at? Pushing through what was movable and what was not movable. Like they kept checking in, which I think is genius. And that's something I don't know that we've done. We've talked about the things that we want to make, you and I. We have this like cool list of things that we want to make and do. Yeah. But it'd be good. I think it'd be good to have a little vision check-in from time to time.
I like it.
I do too. I'm sparked by it. They outlined the fuck out of everything they wrote. And once they had that structure, they would go away and they would write their chunk. They'd each be responsible for writing every other chapter, which Emma said was always awful because you didn't know what writing was coming before your chapter or after your chapter, if that makes sense. It took them about a week to write each chapter. And they talked about what a big gift it was to connect on Friday and share their work, which reminds me of the Spark File, Ashley. Yes. And Emma wanted to acknowledge that Nikki entered all the changes for all the years together and never killed Emma, which I thought was a very sweet, generous thing for Emma to acknowledge.
I think we have some parallels there with you editing the sound of every little.
For every minute that I edit sound, you are somewhere working on a marketing plan. So I could give a shit. I would much rather be editing sound because I don't know how you do what you do and I don't really want to know. So there was a tension point because there would be times when Nikki would, in her writing, like all of a sudden there'd be 4 deep, amazing pages that would rise up. And Emma would be reading them and knew that she was going to have to cut them because it did not hew to genre. Oof. Yeah. Isn't that a punch in the gut?
Ouch.
Yeah. And that's a hard tension point to resolve.
Yeah. Yeah. To be like, this may be some of your best writing. It's not right here.
This may be some of your best writing and it's going to have to be cut.
Yep.
Yeah. Ouch. Hot tears were shed. So when they knew it was time for them to mature individually, Emma said it was like an electric realization. And I love you've so invested in them already that your heart is already breaking.
It is.
But don't be so sad.
Okay.
Emma said she knew that they had to take us off the table, meaning their connection, their friendship would still remain, even if they weren't working together every day. They said we will always be each other's number one audience. Aww. So after working together for 15 years, they consciously uncoupled in 2015.
Whoa.
Yeah. Nikki is now writing her own novel that wasn't written for the marketplace or for a genre, which I love because those 4 pages of pure,
they're not getting cut
singular
now.
voice aren't getting cut now. And she's also written or is in the midst of writing a YA sci-fi graphic novel. And she's a coach teaching writing and the whole how to navigate like the publishing world and all of that. She teaches that to others. And she said, it is a gift having a business so you're not asking your creative work to pay your bills, which I loved, I deeply related to. Emma is now helping people work well together in the corporate space. And she said, and I thought this was so interesting, she does not miss writing every day at all.
Wow.
Yes. Yes.
Wow.
Emma went on to say that collaborators may hold on to each other with the terror about letting each other go and going alone, and would the other one be more successful, not about jealousy, but more a fear about being left behind. And then she said, when Nikki sent her the first draft of her novel, receiving it was electric, and reading the first draft was one of the greatest gifts of her life. Emma said, if someone could have told me how it would really feel to read that first draft of Nikki's solo work, I would have hired someone to assassinate me so I could get out of the way so Nikki could fucking do that.
Oh.
How generous is that? Yeah. So here's some key sparks that I take away from this.
Yes.
It seems like collaborative writing may be more well-suited for genre writers in spaces like YA, popular lit, erotica, mystery, thrillers, etc. That's that theme I kept hearing. Some pieces about process, structure and schedule that shit. Emma and Nikki had that powerful electric creative spark, and then they put a tremendous amount of discipline and scaffolding around it. So structure and schedule. As you can imagine, version control is a nightmare when you have 2 or more authors submitting texts and edits and revisions. The Alices eventually elected Denise Tart as the sacred cow or keeper of words. And she spent huge amounts of time monitoring characters' ages, plot continuity, family trees, and even the floor plans of houses. She carefully saved named and numbered versions of scenes and took notes during meetings so that the group could assign revisions.
Wow, that's a big job.
It is a big job. And like I said earlier, Emma acknowledged that for the entire 15 years she worked with Nikki input all the changes as they wrote. So it seems like someone is going to have to be the class secretary. And it seems like that wants to be someone who enjoys that control and organization and responsibility. Okay. If you're really interested in giving collaborative writing a crack, 3 of the Alices co-wrote an ebook called Group Fiction that is a guide for those who are interested in collaborative writing. From their website, groupfiction.net, they say, we believe there are thousands, even millions of talented writers out there who are simply not suited to solo writing. I haven't read it yet, but you know they wrote that shit from experience.
Yes, I want that.
Their book includes some useful gems like a code of conduct, which includes such tenets as, I am committed to seeing this book through to completion, and I will maintain my sense of humor. It includes a joint authorship agreement that clarifies points like what the group should do if an author drops out and what terms govern the future use of the group's pen name. Yeah. So good nuts and bolts stuff.
Yeah.
Here's a little bit on the softer side of Sears. Consider collaborators with whom you feel safe to be self-expressed and people that you want to spend a lot of time with. The Helenas have a rule that when there are disagreements, the majority rules. There's 3 of them, so that's easy math. And no sulkies were allowed if someone didn't get their way. And the term no sulkies.
No sulkies is a keeper.
That's my spark of the day. No sulkies, Canyon.
No sulkies.
You don't do sulkies.
I don't.
You're so direct.
We don't either.
I love it.
I think we try to.
No sulkies.
Yeah, no sulkies.
Jonathan McLean advised, check in with the other person more than you think you need to. I really take this to heart. I think I'm taking this to heart.
That's good.
Check in with the other person more than you think you need to. Risk annoying each other with being overly considerate. And when you discover where they are, massage your collaborators' soft spots. He said it's the minutia and bullshit, the unsexy stuff that can derail collaborations, the pebbles in the shoe that can feel too small to mention. Those are the ones that can, after walking for miles, rip your foot apart. So take the time to take the pebbles out of your shoe.
What an analogy.
Isn't that great? He's a great writer, Jonathan McLean.
Yeah.
I love you, Jonathan.
McLean.
I love you,
Thank
Jonathan.
you.
Emma said, remember that you are distinct, separate individuals who cannot read each other's minds. That can be a source of conflict, but it can also be an asset. Find ways for your complementary skill sets and work styles to benefit rather than derailing the collaboration. Love that.
That's great.
Consider going into therapy. Work your shit out. Don't go to bed angry. Have a safe word like housekeeping, have vision checkups, annual vision checkups. I actually think this is great guidance for any collaboration.
Awesome.
Yeah.
It's so awesome.
Yes.
I think like in my early years, I was more spontaneously like say yes to every person who wanted to work with me.
Yes.
And,
And that is a good thing in your early years. It's like saying yes to anybody that offers you work.
That's right.
Because you get to try a lot of different things.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't have regrets, but I think I learned a lot of these things the hard way.
Same.
And so it might be different to say yes to a lot of things, but also say yes. And here's the way I like to work. Can we agree upon?
Here's my checklist.
Yeah.
After exploring all of this, I thought, what is a group of writers called? So many groupings have collective nouns, which are also known as terms of venery, like a pride of lions, a murmuration of starlings, a clatter of cats, a murder of crows, a parliament of owls, a flight of stairs. Like ones we know well and ones we know less well. And again, terms of venery is a whole other spark for a whole
terms
other
of
day.
Venery is amazing.
I almost fell down that K-hole. Wormhole? K-hole. I almost took some ketamine and fell down terms of venery. So writers are wordsmiths. So you would think there'd be a term of venery for a collaborative collective of writers. It's not a circle of writers. A circle of writers or a writer's circle is a supported group.
Wait, there's not a real term?
No.
What?
No, there's not. So a circle of writers that's a group of supportive people, like-minded writers who are working on their own projects.
Right.
I did come across a website called unlettedwriting.com, and they had a few suggestions that I thought were sweet. A scribble of writers, a discourse of writers, a sentence of writers. But for a collaborative, collective, or partnership of writers, I'm going to go ahead and nominate a storytelling of writers. Let's get that trending.
Did you come up with that?
I think I might have stumbled across it in somebody else's work, but I can't now when I try to Google it and get back to it, I can't figure out where I found it.
It's fantastic.
A storytelling of writers. So a tip of the hat to whoever I stole that from,
there.
And I can't figure out where. I got to check my browser history. Got to delete that erotica first. But a storytelling of writers, which is also the name of my spark.
I love it.
But it did lead to other sparks, which is what would a collective of sparks be called? A burst of sparks? A file of sparks? A sparkle of sparks? I don't know.
Oh.
A shower of sparks?
A shower of sparks.
Oh, I think it is called a shower of sparks. Like if somebody's welding, you're like, oh, there's a shower of sparks.
Oh, yeah, that's a real thing.
But I also like a file of sparks. Self-serving branding. That's my spark. And I'm sticking to it.
I'm going to keep thinking about that. What is the, say that term again?
Terms of venery.
Terms of venery. What is the term of venery for sparks?
A file of sparks.
A file of sparks.
I think we've struck upon it.
Check.
And a storytelling of writers.
Love it.
Get into it.
What a great freaking spark.
Oh,
I feel energized by that spark. I want to know more about 10 of those things that you just mentioned.
Yeah.
So I'll be circling back. I'll need a copy of that.
That's great. I will provide you with a complete bibliography.
Thanks.
So that's it. We hope this put another file of sparks into your spark file. If there's a spark you'd like for us to explore, or if you've taken a spark and fanned it into a creative flame, which more and more people are doing, and you'd like to share that with us, please email us at thesparkfile@gmail.com or submit it through our website, thesparkfile.com.
And we would love to take your feedback. You also know the price of admission.
Yes.
First, you got to share a creative risk that you've taken recently.
And again, if you're going to reach out to us, just go ahead and include that price
Just
of admission.
do it.
The
Do
price
it.
of admission is so fucking fun.
It's awesome.
I love it.
It's great.
I love it. And be sure to subscribe to this podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe, rate, 5-star review it. If you like this podcast, please share it with people that you love. If you didn't like this podcast, what happened to you, big guy? Who hurt you?
If something tickles your fancy and gets your creative juices flowing, we are writing you a forever permission slip to make that thing that's been knocking at your door. It's your turn to take a spark and fan it into a flame.
You got to outline it. You got to refine it. You got to paint a naked body and totally Eves Klein it.
You got to take it and make it.
You're barely making it through.
Oh, bye. So awesome.
When I bump into something that inspires me, I dump it in my spark file. Could be something that I want to make or how I want to be. I pump it in my spark file. I jump into my spark file. Let's open up the spark file.
Hi, friends. Susan Blackwell from the Spark File here to let you know that the doors are open for the Spark File Illume, a 9-month group creativity coaching mastermind that invites you to be the chief creative officer and chief marketing officer of your creativity. But what does that mean? That means in 9 months in Illume, you will clarify and advance your big creative goals and learn how to effectively share your work with the world. Now, if you're listening to this and you're an experienced creative or an accomplished professional who seeks a space where it is safe to attempt something you've never tried before, or complete a big creative project, or take your work to the next level and acquire the skills needed to share your creative work with the world, Illume might be right for you. We are calling in emotionally intelligent, high-functioning creatives who are ready to level up. You can find out more by going to thesparkfile.com/Illume, but do it now to find out if Illume is right for you and to save with early bird discounts. That's thesparkfile.com/Illume. Take a leap, take a risk. Go to thesparkfile.com/Illume and join us for Illume.